Kolsky, and Ranking Member Republican Richard Shelby will be recognized to give their opening statements later this morning. It should be in just a few minutes, and then official debate will begin this afternoon.
Mr. President.
Senator from New Hampshire.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to talk about an issue that I am...
The Senate is in a quorum call.
May the quorum call be vitiated. Thank you.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to talk about an issue that I'm very, very concerned about, and that involves a man who was recently captured, and he was captured overseas. His name is Suleiman Abu Ghaith. He is Osama bin Laden's son-in-law, and here we have a picture of him right here sitting next to Osama bin Laden. In fact, he appeared with Osama bin Laden right after September 11th, the attacks on our country. And again, here he is right next to Osama bin Laden. He is Osama bin Laden's son-in-law, and he was captured overseas and brought here to the United States of America. And the Attorney General has made the announcement that Osama bin Laden's son-in-law will be tried in New York City for a civilian trial rather than being brought to Guantanamo Bay for further interrogation and held in military custody. I am very concerned about this issue because this is a man who, of course, just based on the relationship he had with Osama bin Laden, in 2001 and 2002, he served as a spokesman for al-Qaeda. He urged others to swear allegiance to Osama bin Laden. In September 12th of 2001, in fact, he appeared with Osama bin Laden and Ayman al-Zawahiri, and in fact, that's him right here in this picture, and warned the United States and its allies that a great army is gathering against you. He also called on all Muslims to battle the Jews, the Christians, and the Americans. He also promised more 9/11 style attacks. Now, this is right after our country was attacked. On September 11th, he appeared with Osama bin Laden, warning of more 9/11 attacks. In fact, he said the storm shall not stop, especially the airplanes storm. In 2002, he reportedly arranged to be smuggled to Iran, where he was held under some form of house arrest. And obviously, we need to understand why the Iranians were allowing such a prominent member of al-Qaeda to be kept in their country. And we have deep concerns about Iran, of course, is the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world and is threatening our country in its right now marching towards nuclear weapons capability. Of course, it has threatened to annihilate Israel and threatened our country, and that's where he was under loose house arrest after his direct allegiance with Osama bin Laden. In addition, American authorities have tied him to an October 8, 2002 attack on the United States Marines training in an island off the coast of Kuwait, and that was a situation where one of our Marines was killed and another was seriously injured. The attack was conducted by al-Qaeda fighters with direct ties to Mr. Abu Ghaith, who is Osama bin Laden's son-in-law. Kuwait actually stripped Mr. Abu Ghaith of its citizenship because of his role in recruiting Kuwaitis to become members of al-Qaeda. Just last week, he pled guilty to charges in the federal court in New York City. And I am concerned because when we take a top member of al-Qaeda, like Osama bin Laden's son-in-law, and we take him from capturing him overseas and bring him to our courts in New York City, then all the full rights of our civilian court system apply to that individual, including the rights when you are in custody and are interrogated to hear your Miranda rights. My former role was as Attorney General of the state of New Hampshire. I have great respect for our civilian system. However, our civilian system was not designed to deal with situations where we are at war. And Mr. Abu Ghaith falls clearly within the definition of what this body has authorized the use of military force against as an enemy belligerent. And when we bring him to New York City, we have to Mirandize him, we have to tell him that he has the right to remain silent, and we lose valuable opportunities to gather intelligence, to protect our country, to find out if he was with Osama bin Laden, which we have pictures of him one day after the September 11th attack. What does he know about al-Qaeda? Who else was involved? What does he know about their network? The time that he spent in Iran communicating, was he still communicating with members of al-Qaeda? Obviously he was, because we've alleged that he helped commit an attack in 2002 in Kuwait, which killed at least one Marine. And who was he communicating? What future attacks are they planning? What associations has he made with other members of al-Qaeda? When we tell someone like that they have the right to remain silent, and we give them a lawyer, we lose opportunities to protect our country. And when we're at war, as we are with al-Qaeda, we need to focus on making sure that we know as much information as possible about al-Qaeda, who they are targeting, who are members of al-Qaeda, and obviously all of us supported the President's decision to take out Osama bin Laden. But what other members of his network, what information are we losing when we bring him to a civilian court system instead of bringing him where he belongs as an enemy belligerent in Guantanamo Bay? It seems to me inconsistent that the administration would take the position, and I support them on this, that they would kill top members of al-Qaeda overseas, yet they are so averse when they capture someone to bringing them to Guantanamo Bay that it is their preference to take them into a civilian court system in the United States of America to read Miranda rights to that individual rather than take them where they belong, to Guantanamo Bay, which I have visited, which is a secure detention facility where people are treated humanely, yet they are kept very securely, not on United States soil. And we can keep them in Guantanamo Bay under the law of war and interrogate the individual as long as we need to. Let me remind everyone that the intelligence that we gathered that allowed us to find and to take out Osama bin Laden took a matter not just of months, but of years to gather. And so to take someone like Suleiman Abu Ghaith and immediately after he's captured, very quickly bring him to New York City, we lose the opportunity to go back to him over time to make sure that we understand the full amount of information that he may have about al-Qaeda. And that is why we have a distinction under our law between the law of war and our civilian system. He is not a bank robber. He is not an average criminal that should be treated the same way as any other crime in America. He is someone who has sworn to kill Americans, has asked others to take the oath for al-Qaeda, who are at war with our country. And so I'm very worried about the fact that the administration seems to be very bent on bringing these foreign terrorists to the United States to give them all of our rights of our civilian court system, rather than focusing on making sure that we have all the intelligence we need to protect our country. I would like to also talk about an individual, the inconsistency that we have here. This one's Anwar al-Awlaki, right? This is Anwar al-Awlaki. Anwar al-Awlaki is someone who the administration, he was an American citizen. He was radicalized. He had both American and Yemeni citizenship. He became an influential leader in al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. He advocated for violent jihad against the United States and has been linked to a dozen terrorist investigations in the United States, including links to the September 11th attacks against our country, links to the November 5th, 2009 Fort Hood shooting. And the administration made the decision in September of 2011 to take out Mr. Al-Awlaki overseas where he was in Yemen, and I certainly support their decision in that regard. But I want to point out how inconsistent it is that we're willing to use the drone program to take out someone like Al-Awlaki, yet we won't use all the tools in our toolbox to make sure that Osama bin Laden's son-in-law is fully held at Guantanamo and is fully interrogated and give us the time we need to make sure that we gather the full information that he has. It's very inconsistent, and I think that the administration should be detaining enemy belligerents in Guantanamo and making sure that they are interrogated. I want to mention one final point because I know that my time is coming up. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. Let's not forget that the administration's first decision with the mastermind of 9/11, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, was to bring him to New York City for a civilian trial in New York, close to Ground Zero, just like they're making the decision now with Osama bin Laden's son-in-law. And the public outrage over bringing Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was so great to New York City, just the amount of security that it would take to secure someone like that, the concerns that he should be treated as an enemy of our country and tried in a military commission in Guantanamo. And he was transferred there eventually by the administration, but only after great pressure from both sides of the aisle in Congress to say this is appropriately where the mastermind of 9/11 belongs, in Guantanamo, before a military commission. I think we find ourselves in the same situation now with Osama bin Laden's son-in-law. There can be no doubt that he's a top member of al-Qaeda, that he had close relationships with Osama bin Laden, that he is charged with conspiring to kill Americans. These are very serious charges, and there can be no doubt that he falls within our authorization of use of military force, that he is an enemy of our country, and that we should be treating him in a similar fashion how we treated Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. And most of all, we need to prioritize intelligence gathering to prevent future attacks against our country rather than focusing on bringing them immediately in our civilian court system, because a man like Osama bin Laden's son-in-law should never hear the words, "You have the right to remain silent." We can't afford to have him be silent. We need to know everything he knows to protect our country, its citizens, and prevent future attacks on America and our allies. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Maryland.
Mr. President, parliamentary inquiry. Has all time expired from the respective parties utilizing their morning business allocation?
It has.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'm rising to speak on the continuing resolution to keep government funding for the rest of the year. But before I do, I have 6 unanimous consent requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They had the approval of both majority and minority leaders, and I ask unanimous consent that these requests be agreed to and that these requests be printed in the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I now rise for the reason I'm here. I chair the full committee of the Appropriations Committee. My very able and esteemed colleague, Senator Shelby, is the vice chairman. We come to the floor today to talk about our legislation, which is an amendment to the House CR to fund the federal government for the rest of the fiscal year. It continues the bipartisan tradition of the Appropriations Committee working closely with both sides of the aisle, and I want to thank Senator Shelby for his excellent cooperation and his wise counsel in doing this and actually co-sponsoring this. Our leadership, Senators Reid and McConnell, have really been critical to bringing this, allowing us to come to the floor, to be debated openly, to have appropriate amendments and voted on by the full Senate. In today's toxic environment in Washington, I must say our conversations have been characterized by civility, collegiality, and absolute candor. What can we do, what we can't do. Not what we would like to do, but what we must do to keep the government doors open. I also want to comment on the excellent tone and conversation and that we've had with the House, specifically our House counterparts, Congressman Hal Rogers, the chairman over in the House Appropriations, and Congresswoman Nita Lilly. We've talked with each other, we've worked together, and if we continue to do that in they're not intervening dynamics, we can get this bill done. Now, Mr. Chairman, before I go into our bill to offer the content, I want everybody to understand there are three things at play in Washington this week. We use arcane language so nobody knows what's going on. So there's the sequester, there's the continuing resolution, and there's the Budget Committee. So everybody's getting it confused, everybody's getting it commingled, and all of it is getting press, and the American people don't understand that there are three separate solutions to three separate problems. Let me go to the Budget Committee, which will be on the floor next week, in which Senator Murray is assiduously and persistently working on her bill. That is for fiscal 14. That is the framework on how we're going to approach our overall budget. What are we going to spend, what revenues we're going to have to raise, if any, and also a review of mandatory spending. That's going on over there. That's for fiscal 14. What the Mikulski-Shelby continuing resolution is, which is really the appropriations bill, not a personality bill, that this will fund the government through 2013. The American people should say, didn't you do that in October? Isn't our fiscal New Year's Eve October 1st? Well, not really, because what happened is we were going into the heat and passion and prickliness of an election year. It was the wise head to extend it where cooler heads would prevail into March. Well, here we are, we're the cooler heads, and we're ready to prevail. What we have here is the legislation, and on March 27th, and everybody needs to understand this, on March 27th, that continuing resolution expires. If we do not pass our bill and then have an agreement between the House and the Senate that is signed by the President, we could face a government showdown. Now, there is no will on either side of this institution that wants to do that. We are absolutely committed to no shutdown, no showdown, no lockdown, no slam down. We want to do the job, and that's why we've been working very carefully to do that. What we will offer here today is funding through the fiscal year, which will take us to October 1st, that meets the mandatory cap assigned to us by the Budget Committee of $1.4 trillion. That's a lot of money, but it's a big government with big responsibility. It includes everything from defense, defending us over there, to the border control, defending us here, to meeting compelling human need and making investments in science and technology while ensuring that we do what we need to do. Our legislation is quite simple and straightforward. It includes 5 appropriations bills. 2 are already in it from the House: defense, military construction, and veterans. It will also include agriculture, homeland security, and a subcommittee that Senator Shelby and I are chair and vice chair of that funds the entire Justice Department. That means FBI, federal law enforcement, science, and commerce. So we have Ag, CJS, Homeland Security, and Defense. Defense and military construction are identical to the House. Agriculture, CJS, and Homeland Security are consistent with bipartisan and bicameral agreements negotiated last fall. Remember, we're reaching across the aisle, we're reaching across the dome. That's how we're trying to do it. However, there are seven remaining bills in the continuing resolution, and they are energy and water. That's money for like Corps of Engineers, Interior and Environment, Financial Services, Transportation, Labor HHS, State Foreign Ops, and a legislation branch. That means they're provided current funding levels and policies with some very limited changes to fix pressing problems. These are called anomalies. The Senate version totals, as I said, $1,043,000,000 equal to the House CR. So the top line is the same. It's how we achieve national goals. It is equal to the House continuing resolution, and it is the same as required by the Budget Control Act. We are in absolute compliance with the Budget Control Act. Now, sequester mandates another $86 billion in cuts. That comes over what we do, and that solution is to be negotiated by the President and the leadership with the concurrence of both bodies. That's part of the charm offensive that's going on. Now, sequester needs a balanced solution, and we will be listening and awaiting their ideas. But right now, what we are looking for is our bills that include bipartisan amendments, minimize the problems of operating, and return to a regular order for fiscal 14. The amendment that we offer is much better than an extension of the current continuing resolution. That means why don't you just take a date, and just change 2012 to 2013. We do that because our bill makes reforms. We actually get more value for the dollar. If we just extended it, we would sometimes be spending money on unneeded programs, one of which would be in our bill, CJS, $500 million for a space shuttle that doesn't exist. We want to change that and put it where it belongs in proper defending the nation and investing in science and technology. So a date change in the continuing resolution is just not workable. The Senate amendment improves the House CR by adding those 3 domestic bills, and as I said, includes a number of changes. I could go through each and every one of those changes, like in agriculture, and what I want to do is just explain the process now. I do want to explain the content of my bill. However, what I'd like to do is take a minute now and yield to Senator Shelby for his opening statement, and then I'd like to be able to come back and explain the details of actual funding. But I must say we have, again, what I appreciated was not only the civility and the collegiality, but the candor. We had to look at not what we would like to do, and not even what we should do, but what we must do to keep, not only when we say government operating, it's to achieve the national goals that America wants. Our national security, both those who wear the uniform of the United States military, but others who defend the nation, like border control, federal law enforcement, local law enforcement at the local level, food safety and drug safety inspectors, to make sure we meet compelling human need in the fields of like education, biomedical research. This is what we're trying to do. Weather satellites that predict, future natural disasters. So again, we don't have a bill here that's what we would like to do, but we have a bill that what we must do. And if we all work together, we ask those who have amendments to be working with our leadership, we believe that we can move this bill by the middle of this week, that by the week's end, the certainty of government funding will be established, and we can show that we could govern. Mr. President, I yield the floor so that my Vice Chairman can say what he wishes to do to add to the debate.
Mr. President.
Senator from Alabama.
Mr. President, first of all, this morning, I'd like to thank Chairwoman Mikulski for her willingness to work together in good faith and to introduce the bill that keeps the government running for the rest of the fiscal year. The Chair and I have had what I would characterize as a long and productive working relationship. I think this bill, Mr. President, is a very clear signal that we intend to continue that relationship for good of the legislative process here and the American people. Mr. President, I believe Congress must learn to deal with the spending constraints that have become a necessary reality for all of us. Much more work remains to be done to secure our fiscal future, including fixing entitlement programs and reforming our tax code. But today, however, we've taken the first step to show the American people that Congress can come together on important issues. My hope is that we will continue to do so. I'm pleased to say that Chairwoman Mikulski and I have accomplished 3 shared goals in this proposed legislation. First, this bill will prevent a government shutdown. Nobody wants that in America. Moving from one continuing resolution to the next only delays our problems and creates added uncertainty. I hope, Mr. President, that we can return to the regular order of producing budgets and appropriation bills to avoid the threat of a shutdown in the future. Second, Mr. President, this bill will provide more flexibility for the remainder of the year so that government agencies can deal with the reality of the sequester, which remains fully in place here. Third, Mr. President, I believe that this bill is a product that both parties in both houses can support. It prioritizes spending and aims to steer clear of divisive issues. In addition, discretionary spending is subject to the caps put in place by the Budget Control Act, and this bill complies with those levels. As noted, spending cuts made by the sequester will come on top of these constraints. I support moving forward with this bill and encourage my colleagues to join together to do the same. Many Americans have lost faith that Republicans and Democrats can work together on anything. I believe, Mr. President, that this bill demonstrates that it's possible, and I hope it will pave the way for a more productive relationship in the future. And while we're sure to disagree on many things, I remain positive that we can restore regular order in the Congress and deal with pressing fiscal matters in a timely, bipartisan manner. I think I speak for both of us when I say that we're committed. Yes, we're committed to putting the budget and appropriations process back on track. We look forward to working with our colleagues who shared that goal and are willing to join us in this effort. This is a new beginning here, Mr. President. Thank you.
Mr. President,
Senator from Maryland.
as you can see, our tone, and we need everybody's cooperation to really, if they have amendments, to bring them to us and also to the leadership that's helping us negotiate which ones will come up. And I think we can get this bill done this week, and we intend to. But I'd like to say why getting it done is worthwhile. I want to speak about agriculture. I'd like to speak about some of the content that we have and do it in alphabetical order because it's easier for folks to follow. In agriculture, our amendment really makes sure that we fund the Food Safety Modernization Act, which is not included in the House bill. What this does is the first major reform of food safety laws in 70 years, and it's much needed. CDC says 48 million Americans suffer from foodborne illness each year. And as you know, this morning before I came to the floor, I attended a hearing on the Select Committee on Intelligence, Mr. President, that I'm a member of. General James Clapper, the head of the Director of National Intelligence, along with key people from the military, civilian agencies like FBI Director Mueller, gave us a 30-page report on threats to the United States. One of the things they talked about was the safety of our food supply. We need to make sure we have inspectors on the ground for what might occur through bacteria or what might also be induced. So we need to know that food safety is a big issue. This amendment is also better in improving clean water to rural communities and provides 165 rural communities with clean water and waste disposal, creating construction jobs today and improving community health. I'm very well versed in that because I represent over 2,000, along with Senator Cardin, 2,000 miles of the Chesapeake Bay. We have older communities. We have issues related to wastewater treatment that are not only polluting the bay, but have very difficult to repair because of the very nature of our population. Wonderful, patriotic people who don't have a lot of cash to pay a lot of taxes for wastewater. But in helping them, we improve public health, we save the Chesapeake Bay with all of its seafood industry. That's just me, but we could go everywhere. On Commerce, Justice, Science, now that's a subcommittee I chair. Boy, do I like it. Why do I like it? Because it goes to everything we're talking about jobs, about justice, about jobs today and jobs tomorrow. When we look at our Department of Commerce, which should be the point place for American business, really promoting private sector initiatives, and most of all, promoting exports. Mr. Chairman, not sending jobs overseas, but sending products and services. That's where the trade negotiation goes. This is where we are part of our economic vitality. This is where we have bipartisan agreement. Let's engage in free and open and fair trade. That negotiation staff and so on is funded through our subcommittee. And also, though, when we send jobs over, we don't want to send jobs overseas. We also want to protect our borders. That's going to be in Homeland Security. But in the Justice Department, this is where, or in our justice funding, we fund federal law enforcement and provide funds to local communities on a competitive basis to put cops on the beat and to give them the appropriate things they need to protect themselves. Let's look at the burn, okay, so let's look at the burn grants, the main federal tool that helps state and local law enforcement. We provide more money. That means more money for body armor, more money for them to learn the latest tips and so on in stopping the gang threat. It also provides Cops on the Beat grant. Both of those are modest increases over the House funding. When I say modest, you know what I'm talking about? For all the local law enforcement does, we're going to provide $15 million. That's not a lot of money by Washington's terms, but to the local police departments, it'll be a help. Commerce Justice also supports innovation. It is in this subcommittee that we fund the National Science Foundation. $220 million more than the House means that we will be able to provide more help to 7,000 scientists and teachers making new discoveries for new products that will lead to new companies and new jobs. This is what we do. We're better than the House also in Homeland Security. This amendment does more to protect the nation from cyber warfare. Cyber warfare is one of the greatest threats facing America. Again, in this 30-page report that we've got on threats, the first 5 pages, the first 5 pages were devoted to just all of the cyber problems. What kind of cyber problems? Cyber attacks, cyber espionage, and the growing nexus between organized crime and nation states, presenting hacking, stealing our state secrets, our trade secrets, and also acting as enablers in like the human trafficking in women, weapons of mass destruction, where you sell women and children as a commodity across the borders of the world through organized crime and corrupt government officials. You'll also sell other kinds of things, including weapons of mass destruction. So this is where we need to fund Homeland Security, the Department of Defense, the FBI, our contribution to Interpol. All of that is in the bill, and we do better. Not a lot better because we are frugal. Again, not what we would like to do, but what we must do. Also, under Homeland Security, we make sure we look out to those things that put people in harm's way. In my own state and to others, there's the whole issue of fires. Now, most fire departments in big cities are run by professionals, but in most rural communities, they're run by the great volunteer fire departments. We have a fire grant program that I helped start that trains and equips local firefighters. What we do here is that we provide more money, $33 million above the House, to help provide those grants. And we also provide additional funds to help state and local fire departments. In the area of compelling human need, I want to talk about the Subcommittee on Education, Labor, and Human Services. In this committee, what we do, this is the subcommittee that funds compelling human need. And what do we do here? We look out for child care development block grant help. We support care for 9,000 more children. And we also make sure we adequately fund Head Start and provide modest sums in there. And in addition to that, we also provide more money to the National Institutes of Health, $71 billion. Now put that in the context that they're going to take a $1.5 billion hit in sequester. Mr. President, I know you represent a great state. You represent Hawaii. Who wouldn't love Hawaii? But I wish you'd look at Maryland. You'd be crazy about Maryland. Not only do we have the wonderful Chesapeake Bay, a Super Bowl championship, but we have other Super Bowl winners. They're called the National Institutes of Health, the National Security Agency, the National Weather Agency. But just the other day when I was over at NIH, they told me and told America through their communications that NIH's work has resulted, working with clinicians and the private life science sector, we have reduced cancer rates in the United States of America by 15%. 15% in breast cancer, prostate cancer, lung cancer. And it's all of those wonderful researchers going on at the Bethesda campus and in academic centers of excellence all over America. But instead of pinning medals on those people and encouraging young people to come into science, we could end up giving them a pink slip. What are we doing? I'm going to not only lower cancer rates, but I'm going to improve and raise the discovery rate. This is what we do in the CR. We are working with on a bipartisan basis. This is helping American people and giving us products that are approved by FDA that we can sell and ship around the world, to particularly to countries that could never do it. So I'm all about jobs, jobs today and jobs tomorrow. That's why what we do in transportation, housing, and urban development is also a big step forward. In addition to looking out for the homeless, we provide also an additional amount of money for highway and road safety programs, where people actually working with funds going to governors at the local level, not some shovel-ready gimmick, but really identify projects in the pipeline. We can generate jobs in construction. We can improve public safety by improved smart highways. And literally, we can help get America rolling again. We have a fragile economy. So I could go on about this bill, but what I want to say is this is a general outline, and I will talk more about it. I feel very passionately about it because we have squeezed every nickel. We've looked at it very assiduously to make sure we are well below, that we are right within our mandated spending cap, but they assessed our national priorities: national security, compelling human needs, how we can help create jobs, look out for the middle class, and make those investments that improve the lives of the American people and generate jobs tomorrow. I think we have a very good bill. I ask everyone's cooperation to get it passed. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Senator from Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of the work that Chairwoman Mikulski and Ranking Member Shelby and the Appropriations Committee have done, and the place they'll bring us to on the floor of the Senate this week as we take an important step forward to fix the FY13 budget. I will be meeting tomorrow, as many legislators do during the course of the year, with my governor. All of the Virginia delegation will be sitting down with Governor McDonnell, who will be visiting, and he and the state will view this as very, very good news as we can talk about this work product. I made my first speech on the floor about 2 weeks ago, and it was a speech that was kind of a plea. It was a plea to avoid the economic self-inflicted wound of sequester. And as all knows, we were not able to do that at the time. There were two bills, and neither of which were able to get sufficient votes to move forward. And the negative consequences from that sequester have been felt in the Commonwealth as I've traveled around, whether it's WARN notices to ship repairers in the Hampton Roads area, planned furloughs of DoD civilian employees, or a delay in a carrier deployment that could potentially leave us more vulnerable in the Middle East. But the good news is we can fix it and improve it, and the Appropriations Committee's work discussed today is a way to begin to do that. We have a chance to get it right and to reduce the negative effects of sequester by dealing effectively with the expiring CR for fiscal year 2013 and then producing a pro-growth 2014 budget. This is the work before this body in the next few weeks, and we need to do our very best work. On the continuing resolution, it has been made clear in the comments before, we do not have a fiscal year 13 budget or appropriations bills at the current time. And so since October, we've been operating out of 2012 appropriation bills, pushed forward for a few months at a time. This leads us to a situation where we're not forward-focused, but we're operating out of an old playbook. We need to align our spending around this year's priorities and not be locked into funding the priorities of the past. The Department of Defense, just to focus on this for a minute because defense is critical to the Commonwealth as it is to all states, is very constrained by the continuing resolution that is currently in place. There's an $11 billion operations and maintenance shortfall that is difficult for DoD to manage in a way that will keep us safe. There's a lack of flexibility to adjust to new needs. There's no new starts on important projects, including in the shipbuilding and naval side, which is so important to the Commonwealth, and that has already led to a delay in the construction of one of the new Ford-class aircraft carriers, the USS John F. Kennedy, with a consequent potential loss in jobs. Other agencies throughout the federal government have been similarly affected. But the good news is there's a solution, and Chairwoman Mikulski and Senator Shelby, the ranking member, have worked together to lay that out today. This week we will work together on a true appropriations bill for the remainder of fiscal year 13 for critical government functions. Department of Defense, military construction, the VA, but also Homeland Security, agriculture, commerce, justice, science. There are other governmental functions that will continue to operate under the FY13 CR, but in many areas we won't be working off a backward-looking document for the remainder of the year, at least because of the work of this committee. We can look at a forward-looking document. And so, again, I want to congratulate Chairwoman Mikulski and Ranking Member Shelby and the Appropriations Committee for working so hard, together with House colleagues, to put us in this posture. A true appropriations approach to the remainder of FY13 fixes many of the DoD problems that I outlined earlier. So, for example, it will allow us to go forward on the shipbuilding contract to construct the second Ford-class carrier, the USS John F. Kennedy. That will be wonderful news for our defense and wonderful news to the shipyard that is the largest private employer in Virginia. It will allow us to move forward on significant ship refurbishment and repair contracts. The repair and refueling of USS Roosevelt and the USS Lincoln were delayed as a result of uncertainty about the budget, but the work this committee is doing will enable us to move forward. We will be able to not completely eliminate the operations and maintenance deficits, but at least to make moves among various accounts to mitigate the effect of the O&M deficit, and that will be across service branches. And just last Friday, as I left the Senate and drove back to my home in Richmond, I stopped and did an economic development tour with a contractor in the Fredericksburg area that works on robotics projects for all of the service branches. And they talked about the fact that the CR was really putting a crimp in their planned expansions, their ability to hire students who are graduating from engineering programs around Virginia and around the nation this fall. The CR fix going forward will give this company and so many others some certainty that will enable them to do the work that we need to do and also help expand employment. Other agencies have a similar upside from the fix of this FY13 CR, as Chairwoman Mikulski was just outlining, improvements in domestic nutrition, improvements in international food aid, which is not only good for the most vulnerable people in the world, but also good for the American farmer, improvements in state and local law enforcement support, immigration enforcement, workforce training, early childhood education. There are many aspects of this fix going forward that are far preferable to the CR and certainly preferable to flirting around the possibility of any kind of a shutdown after March 27. And that's why I strongly support the approach that the Appropriations Committee under its leadership has worked on. It's good for the United States and it's good for Virginia, and it represents a move to forward-looking budgeting rather than playing out of last year's playbook. Now, make no mistake, the sequester is still in place and the sequester is still having significant effects. The FY13 appropriations bill that we're discussing will mitigate the effects, but there will still be an operations and maintenance shortfall within DOD. Every service is still facing potential cuts in training and other readiness functions that should cause us concern. Last Monday, a week ago yesterday, I went to the Pentagon and visited with Secretary Hagel, Deputy Secretary Carter, General Odierno, spent time with General Welsh last week, and not just with the brass, but then I went down into the cafeteria and I heard the real deal from folks who were having lunch. And these were active duty assigned to the Pentagon, DOD civilian, guardsmen and women who were back just coincidentally to do training-related meetings that day, and veterans who were back having lunch with their friends. And as I just went table to table and talked about sequester, I heard about continuing effects and concerns regarding the furlough of defense civilians and potential cuts to contractors. And so those are still out there. But the good news is this bill will address and improve, and then we have a second chance to do so as well as we begin in short order to deal with a proposed FY14 budget. There is a strong budget process already underway that will bear fruit in the committee within the next couple of days. The Budget Committee, under the leadership of Chairman Murray, has worked very hard and has started the process that will lead to committee discussion and then voting and amendment and debate later this week. And the basic goal of what we're trying to do is pretty simple under the Chairman's direction. Let's grow the economy and create jobs while reducing our deficit and debt in an economically credible way. If we do this right, together with the appropriations approach discussed today, we can help reduce and then shape the negative effect that sequester has had on the Commonwealth and the country by replacing a blunt, non-strategic, across-the-board set of cuts with more strategic and targeted approaches. You know, we have a long way to go, obviously, whether it's on finding the path forward just on this bill, and it looks like there's very strong bipartisan support, and that's positive, but certainly on moving forward on the budget and then finding the possibility of some compromise with the House. There's going to be vast differences in the approaches, and we can't sugarcoat that. But I think it's maybe important at least to stop and acknowledge some positive steps. At year end, before I joined the body, the two houses did come together and found a compromise on the Bush tax cuts, which was positive. There were things not to like about it, but like all compromises, but the fact of compromise was a positive. The House has agreed earlier in calendar year 2013 that they would not use the debt ceiling as leverage over the American economy or leverage over these discussions. That, in an earlier instance, led to America's credit being downgraded, so stepping away from that is positive. On the Senate, we're returning to normal budgetary order under normal timing, and that's a positive step. Both sides have agreed to avoid brinksmanship surrounding government shutdown on March 27 and have worked assiduously to avoid it. This compromise to the FY13 CR and the willingness to move forward in a true appropriations approach for the rest of the year in these key government functions is so positive. And the prospects, which I think are very good, of both houses actually producing budgets on time for the first time in a number of years is also positive. So while there are real and significant differences, and we will lay those on the table and debate them with vigor over the next few days and weeks, the American public will see this process unfold. They expect us to debate, listen, find reasonable compromises. We've seen some, just in the last few days, Madam President, I guess I'll conclude and say this. We've seen some recent positive economic news. The jobs report Friday, some of the news about housing, the stock market. There are some positive economic trends that are starting to develop. Congress can accelerate these trends. Congress can accelerate the improvement of the American economy if we keep taking these reasonable steps forward to find a responsible budgetary path. And this work on the CR bill to find an appropriations path for the remainder of the year is one of those positive steps, and I applaud the committee leadership for doing so. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Maryland.
I would like to thank the gentleman from Virginia for his comments. He and Senator Warner are on the other side of the Potomac, and sometimes we're friends, sometimes we're rivals, but it is such a dynamic state, and the junior senator from Virginia knows his state has some of the greatest federal assets there, the Pentagon, the Central Intelligence Agency. It's a home of vibrant technology. That's where we sometimes come as rivals. But I want to ask the question of the gentleman from Virginia, if the senator will yield. When we are moving the continuing resolution, and you talked about being in the cafeteria and going table to table. It's something I do myself, and I know you enjoy it. But isn't your point that we protect the men and women in uniform, but the civilian employees, many of whom are veterans, would be at risk?
Absolutely. We need to, and I'm just coming from an armed services hearing, Senator Mikulski, where we were talking about that very thing, that the armed services mission, of course, requires that we protect the men and women in uniform, but so many of the DoD civilians are absolutely critical to them doing their appropriate jobs. 60% of the staff, for example, of Strategic Command, STRATCOM, are civilian employees. They're doing some of the most important work that we need done in the country right now around cybersecurity. The nurses that care for the wounded warriors that I visited at Fort Belvoir Community Hospital, for example, are DoD civilians. And so the furloughs that affect more broadly the civilian employees should be reason for significant concern. And again, we are taking a positive step toward addressing some of these issues by embracing the appropriations approach that you all have worked on, and we'll have an additional ability to take a positive step with respect to the FY14 budget.
So to just prove our policy goal here is that we cannot have government funding expire. The consequences of a government shutdown would be horrendous. What would they be on the Virginia economy?
Senator, it's impossible. You know,
speaking from your old days as a governor.
It's like that old, commercial about the price of various things, but something is priceless. There's no way to estimate it. Just off the top of my head, there's been analyses of the degree to which the federal budget impacts the economy of each state, and the most recent analysis that I've seen, which was done by Bloomberg about 16 months ago, had Virginia as the state most affected by the federal budget. And so the prospect of more brinksmanship around shutdown, which has happened in the past, even if it doesn't occur, it creates great anxiety. But if it were to occur, whether it's the nurses caring for our wounded warriors, whether it's the researchers that are helping us figure out how to stay ahead of the cyber attacks that are frankly happening on our nation every day, or whether it's the shipyard repairers at Newport News Shipyard who manufacture the large manufactured items in the world, nuclear aircraft carriers, which should be a story of American pride, who would find their jobs at risk. A shutdown, And even the negative consequences of playing out of last year's CR, which is backward-looking rather than forward-looking, are significant. And that's why turning and facing forward is the approach that we need to take.
Well, I thank the gentleman for his really insightful and cogent comments, a great fighter for Virginia. I want to work with you, too, so we create a climate that Senator Shelby and I do. No brinkmanship, no ultimatums. Let's get the job done. We need to do our job so other people get to do their job and keep America rolling.
Thank you,
Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President,
Senator from Alaska.
if I can have 15 minutes to speak 15 minutes to speak for